Welcome to class, everyone. My name is Dr. Claire Jo. In this series of lectures, we'll look at materials development. We'll explore what materials are, how to best develop them, and how to utilize them effectively in our language classrooms. So, here are the main points that we'll cover in today's lecture. We'll have a look at the meaning of term materials development. We'll define what materials are. We'll have a look at what we need these materials for and the kind of impact that materials should have and how materials should help learners to feel at ease. So we'll also look at the effective side as well. Okay. So before we answer this question, what is meant by the term materials development? We have to ask ourselves these two questions. What exactly are these materials that we're referring to? And what do we need these materials for? Okay, so according to Tomlinson, materials are anything that's used by teachers and learners to facilitate language learning. And materials could include videos, so a wide spectrum of learning materials. From DVDs, videos, emails, YouTube videos, dictionaries, grammar books, workbooks, photocopied worksheets, just about anything, as long as the material is educational, something that helps learners to learn their target language. So in our case, English. So, in addition to these traditionally used pedagogical materials, we can also use newspapers, food packages, photographs, invited talks, anything, or even including discussions that take place among learners themselves. So, materials are not just resources, there are a lot more than that. So, according to Tomlinson's definition, we said the materials can be anything as long as it facilitates language learning, right? And we can even say that, materials can be anything as long as there is a pedagogic purpose, even if it's, let's say, a music video that you can easily find on YouTube. And teachers and designers create materials from resources by doing something with these resources. So teachers and materials developers can actually make some changes to these raw materials that they find, let's say, on YouTube or even on Instagram, and make some changes to make the materials suitable for educational purposes. So, in conclusion, these resources that we can utilize are limitless, and the potential to convert them into materials is limited only by our pedagogic imagination. So in other words, as long as we can make the material educational, pedagogical, anything would be useful, our purpose for teaching English and for helping learners acquire various skills in English. And now let's have a look at this question. So what do we actually need these materials for? So if we acknowledge that the most important resources in the classroom are learners and teachers, so the agents, the people who actually are in the process of teaching and learning, what do we need these materials for? Can we just leave everything to the teacher and not plan so much on how to use these materials, on selecting materials and so on? But the thing is, relying everything on teachers is not always enough. Yeah, and teachers and students quite often need support as well. Okay. So let's keep this in mind. Materials must meet a psychological need. So not just transmitting information or knowledge, materials must serve a psychological need of students, or multiple needs, actually. All right, so materials can provide motivation for the learner. And if we don't have any, let's say, textbook or any learning material for the teacher to work with, it would be very difficult for the teacher to motivate students to learn and to keep the motivation level for the entire lesson. So that's one reason why we need materials in language classes. Also, course materials can give learners and teachers a sense of ordered progression. So it provides some structure as to what the learning goals are. So what the teachers and learners should be aiming towards. So for example, by the end of the first month of the class, students should be able to, for example, talk about objects on the table. They should be able to recall the names of major objects that they see in the classroom. And maybe at the end of the semester, learners should be able to strike up a conversation and carry on the conversation for 10 minutes. Something like that, specific goals that teachers and learners should be working towards. So yes, course materials can give some ordered progression, sense of ordered progression, or structure, sense of structure. So while there is a good deal of evidence that progress in a language is not steady and systematic, the belief is that one is making steady and systematic progress. The belief itself can be important. So giving some assurance, both for the teacher and learners, that they're in the right direction towards achieving whatever the educational goal is. Okay, and another important point to remember, these materials must provide ample exposure to the language. Okay, so teachers obviously work as a transmitter of knowledge. They are the one who produce the target language, so English. However, teachers need some help as well. You can't rely, or you can't expect the teacher to be the sole source of input. So teachers obviously can provide exposure to the language, but they cannot provide the range of exposure that can be achieved through carefully selected listening and reading texts. Okay, another important point. Materials must provide a stimulus for other activities. So this is what we mean by learning materials serving a psychological need of students. It's very important that we motivate students to learn, keep that energy level up, and make sure that there is a constant stimulus for students to also carry out other activities. So materials, whether they are texts or tasks, can elicit an oral or written response from learners. So this could be in the form of an immediate reaction. So let's say the student is answering yes or no questions, true, false questions, and so on. Or the text can lead to a more extended discourse, whether it's a debate, writing an essay in response to a writing prompt, or writing a reflective memo or essay after watching a video clip or reading a chapter of a book, and so on. Materials can also be of broader educational value in introducing learners to topics beyond their own experience and by fostering more independent learning. And materials can also stimulate teachers. So not just stimulate and motivate learners to learn, materials can also provide some important sources of stimulus for teachers to think about how to, how to materialize their own ideas by using this educational texts. All right, another important point. Materials must act as teacher education. All right, so teachers need some guidelines as well. They need a constant source of guide, right? So materials, particularly those with an accompanying teacher's book, can provide good models for practice for teachers. So yes, materials can also assist teachers in planning a course, in structuring their lessons, and so on. Okay, so what do we need these materials for? A group of British Council teachers who were working on the materials development course were asked about their opinions on what they needed these materials for. Okay, and based on their responses, teachers need materials for these purposes: to arouse learners' interest. Okay, so this is going back to what we were talking about before, about how materials can actually motivate learners to really study hard, to learn English. Okay, and teachers also said materials should be challenging enough. They shouldn't be too easy, but just above learners' current level of knowledge and proficiency in language. And materials should make students feel that they're having a properly planned class. So this is also going back to the idea of how materials can actually provide some ordered progression or some form of structure. So yes, it's according to these teachers, they felt that materials could help teachers as well, teachers and students, make them feel that the lessons were carefully organized and structured. Okay, and the teachers also said that materials should support and guide both the students and the teacher. Yeah, so this is related to our previous point. To give some structure and progression, materials should provide a variety of experiences in terms of texts, and be a resource that introduces or reinforces areas of lexis or vocabulary and grammar, teach new skills and strategies that our learners really need, and provide knowledge about other cultures as well. So not just introducing our learners to the target language, to the linguistic features of English, in other words, but also introducing them to the Anglophone culture, to the culture of the US, Australia, Canada, the countries where English is spoken, to familiarize them with the cultural aspect of the speakers who speak the target language. Okay, and material should also serve as a springboard, something that provides a lot of stimulation and motivation, that stimulates students to engage with the language and use it. Okay, so we're constantly saying, over and over again that it's very important to motivate students to learn and keep that motivation level going with effective materials. All right, so the teachers also said the materials should stimulate interest in non-linguistic issues like culture, guide learners to be more autonomous, be flexible for other teachers to use the materials, provide teachers with sound teaching principles. So again, we're saying that teachers need some assistance and explicit guidelines as well. Okay, so materials should have an impact, and this impact is achieved when materials have a noticeable effect on learners. So for example, arousing their curiosity, their interest, or attention that are necessary for successful learning to take place. And if this kind of impact can be achieved, there is a better chance that some of the language in the materials will be taken in for processing. In other words, if the materials are successful in achieving these goals, arousing learners' interest, their curiosity, and so on, they are more likely to remember what they have learned and recall that knowledge later. Okay, so materials can achieve impact through these features. Through novelty, for example, by by including unusual topics, something that can be very interesting to students, or even illustrations. By making sure that there is some variety in the course materials. So, for example, breaking up the monotony of a unit routine with some unexpected, some exciting challenges or activities. And through attractive presentation. So, yes, having very visually stimulating, and if possible, in terms of audio as well. So visually stimulating slides can be very, very effective as well. Anything that can arouse students' curiosity. So remember that the students, especially if they're young learners, they are very likely to be attracted to something that's visually stimulating. So pictures, attractive colors, use of photographs whenever possible, or illustrations. Yes, and we also need appealing content, so topics of interest, so that learners can easily relate to the topic. So for example, if you're teaching teenagers, middle school, high school students, talking about K-pop in Korean would be an excellent choice. Or talking about social media, since the majority of adolescents these days are engaged in social media, in the use of social media, or something that has, anything that has universal themes or local references that students can easily relate to. And it's important that there is an achievable challenge as well. So not too easy, not incredibly difficult, but something, a challenge that is achievable with some hard work. Okay, and we need to remember that this impact can be variable. So the nature or the type of impact and the amount of this impact can vary according to, well, because of few characteristics. So if we take into account that if we have a class of fourth graders versus students in a 학원 class or after-school language class, the impact could be different because of the context in which students are learning. And the impact on a group of 10 learners would be different from the impact on a class of 20. Yeah. So it's, let's say, if you are teaching a large group or larger group than 10 learners, then the impact could be less than if you were teaching just a few students. And materials that are relevant and useful have an impact. So for example, choosing a topic that adolescents can easily relate to, social media, K-pop, and so on. And perception of relevance and utility can be achieved by relating teaching points to interesting and challenging classroom tasks. And let's remember, the materials can provide learners with opportunities to communicate. This is very important, that we allow students to communicate in the target language in order to have an impact. All right, so in order to keep learners motivated in their language studies, it's important that we give them plenty of opportunities to actually communicate through this language, through this target language, instead of just presenting students with all these practice exercises, so that they can see English as a tool for communication rather than just the goal to achieve an A on their final exam. Okay, materials should help learners feel at ease. So we're going back to the psychological need that materials should be addressing. Various forms of anxiety can influence language acquisition. So the lower the anxiety or the stress level is, the more likely that successful learning will take place. And relaxed and comfortable students, research has shown, can learn more in shorter periods of time. So if you're stressed out, you cannot perform at your best. So it's very important that through using right materials, we help students feel at ease and make sure that the classroom is a safe environment for them to make mistakes, yeah, and to ask questions and to receive help or from the teacher or from one another. Materials can help learners feel more at ease in a few different ways. So for example, learners in general feel more comfortable when the written materials have a lot of white space instead of having a lot of text or activities crammed onto a page. So it's important to leave some white space and just give them a chance to really think about what it is that they're doing and just reflect on their own learning process, how much they're processing at the moment. And learners in general feel more at ease with text and illustrations they can easily relate to, something that's relevant to their own culture. So when we say own culture, we could be referring to Korean culture or to teenage culture. Yeah, so culture is a very complex term and concept, but let's say for us, it means local culture as well as the culture of their generation, of their age group. And also, learners are likely to be at ease if materials are helping them learn than they are with materials which are always testing them. So we have to give the impression to learners that they're actually acquiring something. Yeah, they're actually absorbing knowledge rather than the materials just being there to constantly evaluate their process, their learning process, to test them. And learners are more likely to feel relaxed if materials actually speak to them through supportive content that does not signal intellectual or cultural superiority over the learners. This is very important. Okay, so we're teaching English. It's a Western language and culture, yeah? And what a lot of textbooks and learning materials end up doing is that they actually end up depicting the Western culture, let's say American culture, and English itself to be superior to, say, Korean language and culture. And this is something we have to avoid at all costs. Yeah? And learners are not likely to feel at ease if they feel through these learning materials that they are inferior linguistically and culturally to American speakers. Okay, and materials should take learners' affective attitudes, their psychological aspects into account. Learners' motives, emotions, and attitudes reflect what is presented in the language classroom. And ideally, learners should be constantly and intrinsically motivated, but it doesn't always happen. So there are ways that we can motivate them by setting some short-term goals, what they can achieve in a relatively short period of time by the end of the month, after 3 weeks of class, while also maintaining an eye on the ultimate goal, long-term goal. So what learners or students are expected to achieve by the end of the semester, by the end of the school year. And materials should help learners develop confidence Yeah, also to make them feel at ease. And the materials can boost confidence through activities that push learners to what is just slightly beyond their current or existing proficiency level. So something that is stimulating, challenging, but not overly difficult. Okay, so here are our review questions for today. What did you learn today that you can use in your teaching? I hope you learned something that you feel that you can utilize straight away in your language classes. And although today's class was just an introduction, these topics were hopefully interesting and useful for you. Okay, so here are some review questions. What is meant by the term materials development? Can you define this term? What are materials? What do we need materials for? And can you summarize what we learned today about how materials should have an impact? Yeah, what kind of impact are we talking about? And why is it important for materials to have an impact on students? And the last point, materials should help learners feel at ease. Can you summarize what we learned, the gist of what we learned about helping learners feel at ease through materials? If you can answer these questions without too much trouble, then you did well today. Here are the references that were used for today's class. And that's it. Thank you for listening, and I will see you next time.